Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Human for Hire Frontier Justice, Collateral Damage Included. Human for Hire Series, Book 4, by T.R. Harris. Narrated by Keith Sellon-Wright. Prologue. Driven by winds approaching 200 miles per hour, a storm of crystallized carbon pellets buffeted Suma's faceplate, pitting the surface and penetrating deep enough to flake off a tiny portion of the polarizing film. A beam of light angled in, scorching his cheek along a line 3 inches long and eliciting an agonized moan from his lips. He turned his head quickly away from the blazing star. "What is the issue?" Juhana asked, hearing the groan through his helmet's comm. "A light breach," Suma replied. "Nothing serious, but I will have to keep my face turned away from Minos." The pair of miners had just exited the nearest service access and were now forcing their way across the baked landscape toward the number 3 collector. Between them they carried a replacement power module, protected from the elements by a shield of chromium, cobalt, and nickel alloy infused with a polymer resin. The material was the same as their suits, and would protect the unit from the harshest conditions the planet Sandicor could throw at it, at least under normal circumstances. But the coming flare season was promising to be a record-breaker, with more frequent and powerful coronal mass ejections than ever before. This season would be one of the best, providing the colony with much-needed revenue and resources. Then Suma cringed. It would also attract the worst elements in the galaxy. The flares could not be hidden. Chenko and his raiders would see them and know the harvest would be rich. They will come for their share. But that was a concern for another day. The immediate issue was the worsening storm conditions, exacerbated by the pre-flare eruptions Minos was giving off as a prelude to the major discharge. The star-facing side of Sandicor had been heated to nearly 1,000 degrees, creating a more divergent climate between the light and dark sides of the planet. This increased the winds and turned the sand-like regolith that swirled within them to a corrosive soup that would rapidly eat through anything but the toughest material. Although their suits were made from an alloy 5 times stronger than steel, in an hour's time the outer skin would be sanded away to nothing, meaning death for anyone remaining outside for long. And that wasn't counting the radiation. As Suma and Juhana neared the collector assembly, they found a modicum of relief from the shade it provided. The structure was massive and built to withstand even the most intense flares and the strongest winds. However, it, too, was made of the 3-phase alloy, only 50 times thicker than the suits, and every 8 years the grid had to be replaced. It was an expensive and dangerous job, but something that had to be endured since the colony's very survival depended on the material harvested from the collectors. The miners moved awkwardly toward the base of the assembly, fighting the prevailing wind direction. The flat surfaces of the carrying case acted like a sail, adding to the time it took to reach the collector. Both Suma and Juhana had made numerous power unit changeouts before, but never this close to a major eruption or in these conditions. The alarm had sounded only an hour earlier, signaling the fault and setting the colony into frantic motion. The collector would remain inoperative until the defective power module could be replaced, and without this collector the harvest would be down by 1/3. That was unacceptable. The collector array was a towering structure shaped like a gigantic sail, anchored to the scorched surface by 2-foot-thick cables and facing upward toward the fiery star. The facing grid was a technological marvel. It had to be, considering the elusive material it was designed to gather. At its base was a squat equipment room, partially shielded from the angled starlight by a blackened rock 1 billion years old. If the stone had a consciousness, it would never have imagined the role it would play in the survival of the 300 hardy souls that called Sandicor home. The collector was strategically placed at this location because of the rock. Unlike the collector grid, which operated in the full fury of the star Minos, the filters and power modules required additional protection against the elements. The outcropping helped shield the equipment from at least some of the intense heat and radiation. The fact that the power unit had failed unexpectedly on Collector Number 3 meant that a fair portion of the harvest revenue would have to be spent on a new backup unit. Replacement parts were crucial to the operation of the colony, since all three collectors were required to produce the bare minimum harvest. Anything less would spell disaster. The miners set the heavy box on the ground and pulled open the equipment shelter door. Fortunately, the rock partially protected them from the full force of the wind and the intensity of the starlight. But time was running short. Not only were they limited as to how long they could spend outside, but the major eruption could happen at any time. If they were still outside when that happened, no amount of three-phase alloy would save them. Suma ducked inside the room and quickly unhooked the lines to the faulty power unit. Then he and Johanna dragged the corrupted module out of the building and tossed it away. The wind caught the face of the unit, and it began tumbling, stopping about 20 feet away when it collided with another jagged rock. Together, the miners lifted the replacement unit and moved it inside the shelter. After removing the module from the carrier, the hookup was straightforward, and within 10 minutes the new unit was installed. "Run a test," Suma ordered through the comm. Others in the control room heard his command and activated the circuit. "Full power! Success!" said an excited female voice. Her name was Deanna, and she was Johanna's promised. The concern for her mate-to-be was evident in her tone. "Number 3 is coming back online. Now hurry. You are well within the red zone for the coronal ejection. It could happen at any time." "Understood," Suma said, even as he and Johanna were already on the move. The access hatch was only 70 feet from the collector, but in the tempest it seemed like 70 miles. The pair leaned into the wind, with Suma now covering the pit in his helmet lens with a gloved hand, shading his face. They were staring directly into the full fury of the star, which sat only 21 million miles away from the tidally locked planet of Sandicor. On the star's surface, Suma could see the swirling yellows and orange of fusing hydrogen and helium, along with a fair number of darker patches where the cooler gases resided. It would be from here that the flare would erupt. Although the colony prospered from the predictable cycle of flare eruptions, they could only estimate when the next major event would occur. Granted, their estimates were fairly accurate, usually within an hour or two. But still, they were estimates. Suma led the pair toward the access shack, given priority over Johanna because of the hole in his polarizing film. They were still 40 feet away when Deanna's voice cried out in his comm, "Eruption! Incoming flare!" Suma glanced up at the star. He couldn't see the flare, not yet. The light and radiation would take just under 2 minutes to reach the planet. But the operators in the control room knew the truth. "Hurry, Johanna!" Suma cried. "I am doing my best, my friend. Do not wait for me. If you must, get to the hatch and close it." "I would never do that, and leave you outside." "You may have to. We both know the truth." And the truth was that the miners could only move so fast in their suits, and adding the impeding force of the wind, it would be a miracle if either of them made it to the hatch in time. "Give me a count," Suma ordered. 74 seconds, said Deanna's trembling voice. Suma reached the access hatch with 29 seconds to spare. He swung open the door and stepped inside, knowing that simply being inside the enclosure would not save him against the flare. The door would have to be closed. "Johanna, hurry!" The silver-clad figure of his friend was still 20 feet away and struggling against the wind. 15 seconds! Hurry, Johanna! Deanna cried. And then Juhana stopped and raised one of his 6 hands. "Goodbye, Deanna, I will not make it. I will not even try. Suma, my friend, do what you must." "No, I cannot." 5 seconds. 4, 3. And then Suma closed the hatch. The power of a flare striking the planet was deceptive and came in stages. At first, an onslaught of deadly radiation and electromagnetic energy struck Sandikor, traveling at the speed of light and reaching the planet in only a couple of minutes after the eruption. The colony was protected against such a strike, but not anyone on the surface. The coronal mass ejection itself would only last a few seconds on the surface of the star, but the ejecta, the stream of charged particles and minute amounts of more exotic material, would take roughly 78 hours to reach Sandikor. This ejecta was what the collectors gathered and then filtered, including the elusive element 129. Until the last remnants of the flare faded, no one would be allowed onto the surface. By then, there wouldn't be much of Juhana's body to recover. Suma leaned against the rock wall of the access tunnel, remorse and pain flooding his senses. He and Juhana were born on Sandikor during the same year, and although they were of different species, they were more like brothers than mere friends. With so few children born on the planet, they played together and shared their dreams while learning how to tend to the harvest from their fathers and mothers. Once reaching worker age, they spent the past 9 standard years tending to the collectors and helping refine the crop. And now, they had nearly died together. Suma knew Juhana was right. He would have died with his friend, making a last-ditch effort to pull him inside. That was why Juhana stopped advancing. He did not want to leave Suma the option. Just then the names of Canis and Dalikon came to Suma's mind, 2 other miners who had recently lost their lives while mining E-129. And they were just the latest on a long list of miners who had given their all for the good of the colony. A miner's life on Sandikor was not an easy one, nor was it safe. But all the inhabitants of the colony were born here, and although only a few restless souls ever left Sandikor for a better life elsewhere, the others remained. This was their home, no matter how hellish it may be. Even so, Suma would grieve the loss of his friend, his best friend. It was what the miners of Sandikor did, and far too often. 4 days later, Juhana's body was recovered. Deanna insisted on viewing the remains, but she quickly regretted the decision. The suit had been compromised, but that came long after the intense radiation had fried the body. It was a grisly scene, and one the young female would never forget. Miners on Sandikor died for many reasons, but seldom was it from exposure to a flare. After 300 years, they were too versed in the precautions to let that happen. But on occasion, it did. Juhana's charred body was a vivid reminder of the reality they all faced. 8 days after the flare, the members of the colony gathered in the Grand Hall or watched on broadcasts as the yield was announced. Suma was present in the hall, seated to the left of Elder Tenzin, the current leader of the colony. Tenzin was a grizzled, yellow-skinned creature of a species whose name Suma couldn't remember if he'd ever been told. The colony was made up of 18 unique species of prime, each having come to the planet in the early days to work the harvest. By now, no one paid attention to race except when it came to mating. Other than that, everyone was simply a member, a compatriot sharing in the dangers and rewards of a life on Sandikor. Tenzin stood at the podium. "Giving grace for the efforts of our friends Suma and Juhana, we have had a very successful first harvest of the season," he announced solemnly. and in honor of his selfless act of courage and sacrifice, a memorial plaque will be affixed to the Grand Hall in honor of Johanna Semyon. Let us never forget the service our two friends gave for the good of the colony." The elder looked at Suma and nodded. Suma fought back the tears. He didn't feel he deserved to be honored. He had closed the door, leaving his friend outside to die. It would have been more of an honor to have joined him in death rather than selfishly save his own life. Unfortunately, that was not how the others saw it, including Deanna. She avowed her respect for Suma, holding no grudge for what he had done. Her actions only made Suma feel worse. But now Tantor was continuing. "The most recent flare brought forth with it a particularly rich crop of E-129, in fact the most we have ever recovered in a single event. Without number 3 in operation, the yield would not have been anywhere near what it was. As a result, we have gathered 98 full units." A few of the people in the hall knew the number, but most did not. Now they gasped before a few began clapping. Soon the hall was filled with celebratory cheering. Even Suma forgot his self-pity and joined in the festive mood. 98 units were the equivalent of 3 or 4 major flares, and this had come in only 1. And with the current demand for E-129, that would mean prosperity for the colony, a chance to build some reserves for the hard times that were bound to come. Watching and listening to his friends and colony mates rejoice in the good news made Suma temper his guilt. This was indeed good news. He would let himself honor Johanna by sharing in the joy the harvest brought to others. It was appropriate. "And now, please, please," Tantor was saying, trying to regain control of the room. Slowly the crowd was quieting down. And that was when the smile left the elder's face, for there was another message coming through the speakers and circulating throughout the colony. "Attention! Attention! 2 spacecraft have landed at Access Port 9. I repeat, 2 spacecraft have landed." The voice was strained and provided no further explanation with the announcement. None was needed. Chanko Kantos was on Sandikor. With his newfound status within the colony, Suma was invited to meet with the raiders. Within minutes, Chanko's troops were moving unrestricted throughout the maze of underground tunnels and caverns. They entered abodes and rummaged through personal belongings, looking for anything of value they had not found on their previous visits to Sandikor. But as intrusive and insulting as the thefts may have been, that was only the beginning. Chanko Kantos was a stocky creature with reddish skin. He was Central Prime, with 2 legs, 2 arms, and an oblong head with inset eyes, an expressive mouth, and a fairly large nose. His ears were pointed, and a pair of knobby 1-inch-long horns poked from his forehead. He strode into the governing chambers without invitation, accompanied by his support entourage of Vlasnor, Bensin, and Vor. His lieutenants were each of different races, as were most of his 40-plus raiders that filtered through the colony. Within the meeting room, the 4 aliens plopped down in chairs, with Bensin draping a long leg over an armrest. None appeared intimidated in the least. They knew the colony was no threat to them. That point had been demonstrated in blood beginning 4 years ago when Chanko first came to Sandikor. Since then the resistance has been more subdued, almost to the point of non-existent. What was the point? The raiders were killers, and the miners were not. "So, my good friend Tantor, I saw from the reports that you recently encountered a record flare from your life-giver, Minos. Chanko's voice was deep and accented, with certain letters and syllables spoken with a trill in his tongue. This caused confusion with the translation bug, with Suma having a terrible time understanding the alien. Still, he hung on to every word. Misunderstandings in the past had resulted in the death of colony members simply from the frustration Chanko felt from having to repeat himself. "You must tell me the good news. As colony members ourselves, we wish to share in the bounty. Please, tell us, Tansin, what was the yield?" "You are not members?" Suma was shocked to have heard the words come from his mouth, even as they were issued forth as a whisper. His heart leaped into his throat and his eyes grew wide as Chanko shifted his attention to the young miner. "You are called Suma, are you not?" the raider said to him, the first time Chanko had ever spoken to him directly. "A young spirit coming of age within the colony." "Yes, he is, Suma," Tansin said quickly. "He is a valuable member of the colony." Chanko studied Suma for a moment, a thin grin on his lips. "You do not approve of my presence here, young Suma. Why is that?" Suma was taken aback by the question. "Because you were a killer and thief who has come to rob us of our essential bounty, that is why." That was what he wanted to say. But instead, he remained silent. "Please, speak freely, miner," Chanko pleaded. "I am curious to learn of the colony's impression of my people and me. It has been nearly a standard year since we were last here. What attitudes have changed since our last visit?" Suma looked to Tansin, who gazed back at him with sad eyes. The situation was out of his hands. Suma's fate was now in the hands of the raider. "Forgive me," Suma managed to say at last. "I lost a good friend in the last harvest. His death still weighs heavy on my soul." "That is understandable," Chanko said with sincerity. "I hope his death was not in vain." Suma felt as if he'd been slapped in the face. The raider's presence on Sandakor did make Johanna's death meaningless, but dare he express his true feelings? At that moment, Suma's past guilt resurfaced. He should have died on the surface of the planet along with Johanna. Now he felt it only fair that he should die defending his friend and colony. Someone had to speak the truth. "Yes, his death was in vain. With you here to take our harvest, the harvest Johanna gave his life to create. He did it not for your benefit, but for the good of the people of Sandakor, for the colony. When you leave after having raided our belongings and wealth, his death will be meaningless. He should have survived, and you should leave here with far less than you will. I could have died with him. Now, I am willing to give my life to let the truth be known about you and your raiders. You are not welcome here. You have never been welcome. All you do is take and provide nothing for the community. You are parasites, beasts that haunt our nightmares. Do what you will with me, I care not if I must witness further decay of my colony from the likes of you." The smile never left Chanko's mouth as he listened patiently to Suma's last testament. Now all he had to do was to draw his weapon and place a bolt into his chest. Suma was prepared for that. In fact, he'd never felt stronger, more sure of anything he'd ever done in his life. He had spit in the face of the demon be damned. And then Chanko moved his hands, but not to grasp his weapon, but to begin a slow clap. After a moment he stopped and looked at Tansin, who was pale and trembling from fear. There was no telling what revenge the raider would take on the colony for Suma's insolence. This is indeed the spirit of the young I was speaking of. It brings vitality to the community, and keeps the will to live thriving from generation to generation. Without it, your colony could wither and die, which would do me no good." He looked back to Suma. "Relax, young miner. I will not kill you today. I welcome the clearing of the tension between us, and I respect your honesty and courage. Then you will leave and take no harvest? Let us survive." Chenko battered his eyes several times, stunned by the interruption. "What is this, Lesnor?" he said, addressing his second-in-command. "I express a moment of gratitude, of leniency, and this is the reward I get? More demands on me?" His eyes never left Suma. "No, I will not leave without my share of the harvest." "It is not your harvest." And now the weapon appeared in Chenko's hand. He leaned forward in his chair and pointed the barrel at Suma's forehead. "Do you wish to die, young Suma? Is that why you provoke me as you do? I gave you a chance to express your feelings. You did. Now be quiet. You are no longer a participant in these affairs, but merely an observer. Tansin." "Yes, Lord Chenko." "What was the harvest yield? And do not lie to me. I will verify before I leave." 94 units. The raider recoiled, his eyes still locked on Suma and his weapon aimed at his forehead. 94! That is truly impressive. I see now why you would fight so hard to keep it." He lowered the gun, and Suma breathed again. "You do realize what a significant amount that is? With the proliferation of energy credits backed by the products that produce said energy, E-129 is becoming one of the rarest elements in the galaxy. Even the large energy firms, such as Maris Clis and Raynor, are falling short in their breeder reactors. Raw E-129 in its purest form is demanding a premium. And from what the scientists say, Minos is moving into a period of more frequent flares, meaning an even richer harvest to come. Because of that, I will only take 60 units. You must know how generous that is of me. 38 units will be enough to restock your colony and help with future harvests throughout the season." Chenko then turned to Tenzin, and his eyes grew hard. "But be assured, I will not be as generous with future harvests. I will make up for my loss with a higher percentage in the future. We need the E-129 as much as you do, maybe more. You have the means of creating wealth. We do not. All we get is what we take from others. And in the wake of the Clean invasion, my people are hurting because others are hurting. Tenzin, you should consider yourselves fortunate. Your colony is one of the few prosperous entities in this part of the galaxy. I will not starve you to death, but I will leave you with the incentive to make each harvest the best it can be." "The harvest is what it will be. Only Minos controls that, not us," Tansin waxed philosophically. "That may be true, but make the effort anyway. If I find my time coming here is no longer profitable, I may take it all and let your pitiful colony die. After all, who would want to live on such a slime pit as Sandicor? I would be doing you all a favor if I was to end your miserable existence. Now, get us our share, and we will be on our way.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?